Welcome to this Heritage Talk, an introduction to environmental archaeology, with our speaker, Inés López-Dóriga, a senior environmental archaeologist at Wessex Archaeology.
Hello, and welcome to this webinar by Wessex Archaeology. I'm going to speak about environmental archaeology. My name is Inés López-Dóriga, and I'm the lead environmental archaeologist at Wessex Archaeology. My talk is going to be focused in two parts. It's going to be first about what is environmental archaeology in general, and later I'm going to speak about what do we do in the environmental department at Wessex Archaeology. First, I also want to speak about what's archaeology, or rather archaeologies. There isn't a single type of archaeology. There is academic archaeology, which starts from people asking questions to archaeological sites. There is as well commercial archaeology, which is the main type of archaeology that we do at Wessex Archaeology. And it starts with somebody wanted to build something somewhere. That leads to the investigation of a site, and which allows us archaeologists to put some questions to the site, and then the site gets either scheduled if it's very, very important, or it gets planning permission, and we investigate however much is necessary for the planning permission to be obtained. And a third type of archaeology is community archaeology, which it's something in between commercial and academic archaeology, and it's feedback between site investigation and questions. So people are interested in how the site was in the past, for example, their village in medieval times, and they try to investigate it. As well, most people are familiar with fieldwork archaeology, which is the most visible part of archaeology, but it's only the tip of the iceberg in archaeological work. So there is a lot of work happening in labs and indoors, and it's the post-excavation process, so mostly assessment and analysis in commercial archaeology, and it's most of the time. So from investigation of a site in the field till the completion of the analysis can pass several years. The people who work in these labs are called post-excavation specialists, and there are two main types of. They are specialists in artifacts or finds specialists, and specialists in ecofacts or environmental archaeologists. So yeah, today we are going to focus on environmental archaeology, but more particularly in plant remains, and seeds, which are the bulk of the evidence that we find in the sites that we are studying in Wessex. Archaeobotanical remains can be distinguished in two types. There are macro remains and micro remains. Macro remains are the ones that you can see with the naked eye, although to study them you need powerful but not very powerful microscope. And the micro remains are the ones that are really, really tiny. You cannot see them with the naked eye, and you need a very powerful microscope to study them. So microbotanical remains are, for example, pollen, which most people are familiar with because that's what produces allergies in spring. Pollen grains can inform about past environments when they are found in archaeological sites. Although there are some problems, for example, some trees produce more pollen than other trees, so sometimes we need to be careful on how we interpret the data that we find in archaeological sites. There are as well spores that are found in the same types of environments as pollen. The problem with these types of evidence is that they are not preserved in all archaeological sites. So, for example, pollen survives well in acid soils, and we cannot rarely find any pollen grains in very basic environments. phytoliths are silica body of plants that we find in archaeological sites where plants have been processed. So these bodies are released when plants have been burned or cut and inform about use of plants. It's the same with the starch grains. They are present in underground plant parts, and are released when these are cooked. For example, in pottery vessels, there are remains of starch plants that were cooked in there. Diatoms are unicellular algae that are also found in sites with water and can inform about the landscape and also features that used to contain water, like, for example, ponds. And we focus a lot of our work in macrobotanical remains. So it's a very diverse type of evidence. There is good wood charcoal, seeds, leaves and berries, roots and tubers, capsules, thorns, stalks, stems, chaff, seed pods, cones. So yeah, very, very variable material. You may have noticed that all of this is actually organic evidence, and you may be aware that this would normally decompose in most depositional environments. I will speak about later about how these types of plants are preserved in archaeological sites. They are never ever preserved as they are in these pictures. We also have transformed botanical remains. So, for example, transformed wood that has been made into implements, or pieces of textile or fibers that from plant origin that have been woven to make containers. Bread, for example, that can contain inclusions of plants that are still identifiable, or crusts in pottery that have been used for cooking, imprints of plant remains in pottery, and also coprolites, which contain remains of plants. So as I said, we have a problem with macrobotanical remains because they are made of organic matter. Macrobotanical remains are preserved by 3 different types of processes. We have mineralized plant remains, waterlogged plant remains, and charred plant remains. Mineralized plant remains are the ones that are preserved, for example, in cesspits, where there is a lot of organic matter in the composition, and it's often waterlogged, and also there is little oxygen, and that produces replacement of the phosphates by the decomposition of organic matter, which replaces the soft parts of the seeds, for example, and that allows to preserve a range of plants that we normally don't find in archaeological sites, and inform about diet. Other type of mineral replacement is that produced by contact with metal objects, for example, plant remains that are attached to buckles can inform about the textiles that were worn by people in the past. Waterlogged plant remains are those that are preserved in water, permanent water conditions. So, for example, sites that have are near the shore or near rivers and are always inundated can preserve waterlogged plant remains that are representative of the environment. Charred plant remains are the most frequently found on archaeological sites. They are preserved by carbonization, which is always an accidental process, and leads to the incomplete burning of organic matter, and allows for the preservation of these remains in archaeological sites for a very long time. The problem with carbonization is that not all plant parts survive equally to fire. So, for example, in this case, we have cereal grains, and they are quite sturdy and resist very well fire, but other plant parts, so for example, leaves, usually turn to ashes rather than become carbonized. And the advantage of charred plant remains is that they inform us about what people were often cooking when they had accidents cooking.
Thank you for watching part 1 of this heritage talk, an introduction to environmental archaeology.